We're about to expose yet another video from Rabbi Tovia Singer. Hey friends, this is Michael Brown here. Delighted to be with us. In a moment, I will be joined with my colleague Jonathan McClatchie, now a resident biologist at the Discovery Institute. He's been a biology professor, and he leads the great website talkaboutdoubts.com. You know, we've done a series, maybe 10, 11 videos so far. We could do hundreds if we had the time, debunking these horrific counter-missionary videos from Rabbi Tovia Singer. And for those that know the word, for those that know Jewish tradition, other things, they're just so easy to demolish. But because there are lots of people on the internet with no background, especially Christians that pick up his stuff, that he does mess with the faith of some. And that's where we're doing our best to say, hey, here, if you want answers, if you want truth, here they are. So we're going to get into a video. Jonathan brought it to my attention. I'd seen it come across my feed. It's like, you got to be kidding me. Then Jonathan got in the contest. We said, let's just get together and do this. So, Jonathan, welcome back to the Line of Fire. Always great to have you here.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it is a real joy. All right, so folks may not know, but over 30 years ago, Tovia and I did what ended up being an impromptu debate at the house of a Russian Messianic Jew. He had brought us both over there under false pretenses. We did this debate, and he asked for those tapes to not be released. Then we did a subsequent debate that was hosted on Sid Roth's broadcast that blanketed New York, New Jersey. And then we interacted a lot privately after that, and then he cut me off, has refused to deal with me under any circumstance, has had many opportunities to debate me, and has refused. But actually, last year, he was supposed to debate Jonathan McClatchie. It was interesting. Jonathan's not a Jewish believer, and although he's a seasoned apologist, did not specialize in answering Jewish objections to Jesus. What happened with the debate? You were supposed to debate, and then it got canceled.
Yeah, we were supposed to be debating in Indianapolis last summer in August. The debate was scheduled and everything, and then Tovia Singer had something come up. I think he wanted there was a problem with the venue, like their heating system wasn't working, and so they wanted to postpone it until, or their air conditioning, I think it was broken. So they wanted to postpone it, and then Tovia Singer was expecting the birth of his grandson, and so he wanted to wait until after the birth of his grandson so he didn't miss that. And then his grandson was born, and then he announced that he actually didn't want to do the debate after all. So I was a little disappointed it didn't take place. But I still write various articles relating to some of Tovia Singer's work. I've read his 2-volume set, Let's Get Biblical, and I am a frequent follower of his YouTube channel.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is he's avoided debating people like me for over 30 years, and there are others like me he's refused to debate. And then he'll find a Christian, maybe debating for the first time, a Christian leader or someone with no background in this, and hold these debates. And then I heard he was going to debate you. I thought, I don't know that he realizes what he's asking for. And my opinion, only an opinion, is he dug a little deeper and found you were not the kind of person he wanted to debate. God knows. But here's what we do know. He puts out these sensationalistic videos with these sensationalistic titles, and you actually get into it. It's like, what are you talking about? So there's one, I didn't watch it. I saw, don't watch this unless you want to leave Christianity. It's like, oh, this is going to be the new devastating argument. So he starts out, he gets into Isaiah 53, and we're going to play a clip in a moment. But his basic thesis is that if you read the other chapters, Isaiah 40 to 55, read the surrounding chapters, you'll find out Isaiah 53 is not about Yeshua at all. It's not about the suffering Messiah. It's about the people of Israel. So let's listen to this clip.
James is a very good point. So as it turns out, it's very important if someone wants to remain a Christian to just read Isaiah 53. That's what you want to do. Here's what you don't want to do if you want to be a Christian tomorrow. Don't read Isaiah 41, 42, 43. Don't read the chapters that introduce it. Don't read the whole book of Isaiah, Because if you read the whole book of Isaiah, so I'm just going to point out the verses quickly: 41, 8 and 9, 42, 6, 43, 10, 44, 1, 21, 45, 4, 48, 20. You can see where this is going. This is the fourth of four servant songs. No matter what you believe, it's axiomatic that the author, Isaiah, had in view that if you're reading Isaiah 53, you've read the chapters that introduce it. So if you are watching me right now, listening to my voice, if you want to remain a member of your church in good standing, do not read Isaiah 41, 8, 9. Don't read Isaiah 49, verse 3, where it says explicitly that Israel is God's servant. Don't read Isaiah 48, verse 20, Israel's God's servant. Just read Isaiah 53. So this is like a helicopter theology where you just land in the 53rd chapter of a 66-chapter book.
All right, Jonathan, you've written on this extensively. I've written, taught, debated on Isaiah 53 for decades. When you hear that argument, what's your response?
Sure. So Tovia notes correctly that the servant in the book of Isaiah is sometimes identified as the nation of Israel. And he gives a number of examples, which are the same examples he also gives in his Let's Get Biblical, Volume 1. I have an article where I go into this topic extensively on my website, jonathanmcclatchie.com, if anyone is interested in checking that out. I have an article entitled The Treasury of Isaiah 53, A Witness to Israel's Messiah, and I interact in that article extensively with some of Tovia Singer's analysis. I won't go through all of the points that I raised there here, but let me just give you a brief sample. So one of the texts that Tovia likes to cite concerning Israel being the servant is Isaiah 41, verses 8 and 9, where we read, "But you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, the offspring of Abraham, my friend, you whom I took from the ends of the earth and called from its furthest corners, saying to you, you are my servant, I have chosen you, and cannot cast you off. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, I will help you, I will upload you with my righteous right hand." And so this text reveals actually that far from being saved by Israel's afflictions, those nations who wage war against Israel will in fact be subject to destruction. And this point is borne out in other prophetic texts as well. Jeremiah 30, verse 11, for example, "For I am with you to save you, declares the Lord. I will make a full end of all the nations among whom I scattered you. But of you I will not make a full end. I will discipline you in just measure, and I will by no means leave you unpunished." Jeremiah 46, 28 is another example. Tovia also cites Isaiah 44, where we read, "But now hear, O Jacob, my servant, Israel, whom I have chosen." And then in verse 21, it says, "Remember these." So it's identified, the servant is Israel. But then verse 21 and following, it says, "Remember these things, O Jacob and Israel, for you are my servant. I formed you. You are my servant, O Israel. You will not be forgotten by me. I have blotted out your transgressions like a cloud and your sins like mist. Return to me, for I have redeemed you. Sing, O heavens, for the Lord has done it. Shout, O depths of the earth. Break forth into singing, O mountains, O forests, and every tree in it. For the Lord has redeemed Jacob and will be glorified in Israel." And so we learn that instead of providing atonement for the nations, Israel herself requires salvation from her own sins. All right, and so on the interpretation that the servant is in fact Israel, this doesn't really comport particularly well with what we read in Isaiah 53, verses 9 and 11. So it says in verse 9 that they made his grave with the wicked and with the rich man his death, though he had done no violence and there was no deceit in his mouth. Or verse 11, "Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities," and so forth. And so as you actually read the various texts that Tovia cites, we learn that in fact Israel is judged for their own sins. They're unrighteous before God. Isaiah 45:4 is another example he gives. "For the sake of my servant Jacob and Israel my chosen, I call you by your name. I name you though you do not know me." But in verses 17 and 20 and verse 21 and 22 of the same chapter, though, we read the following statement. So in verse 17 it says, "But Israel is saved by the Lord with everlasting salvation. You shall not be put to shame or confounded to all eternity. Or verse 21, declare and present your case. Let them take counsel together. Who told this long ago? Who declared it of old? Was it not I, the Lord? And there is no other God besides me, a righteous God and a Savior. There is none besides me. Turn to me and be saved, all the ends of the earth, for I am God and there is no other. So thus Israel is apparently no better than the other nations, because Israel also is in need of salvation by God.
Yes.
And so it's example after example. As you read the context, you discover that actually these examples that Tovia likes to cite backfire against his argument by showing that Israel cannot really be the servant spoken of in Isaiah 53.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is when you look, even the rabbinic commentators, and it's fascinating, people that don't know Jewish tradition, they'll believe this rabbi, but this rabbi often contradicts or ignores Jewish tradition, especially when it undermines his argument. So, for example, Radak, one of the so-called big three rabbinic commentators, he says the servant in Isaiah 42 is the Messiah. The Targum, which is the ancient Jewish translation paraphrase of the Hebrew Bible into Aramaic, it identifies the servant there as the Messiah. Or, for example, Isaiah 49 and 50, rabbinic commentaries say that's the prophet Isaiah himself, or prophets in general. And then there are many rabbinic traditions that say the servant in Isaiah 52, 13 through 15 is the Messiah. So in point of fact, you have rabbinic tradition saying Tovia Singer is wrong, that there are two servants. There is the nation Israel as a whole, and there is the Messiah, the servant of the Lord. And then, as you said, Jonathan, but then as you go through other verses, Israel as the servant is guilty of sin. Israel, the servant, is in exile because of sin. Israel is in darkness and in need of a redeemer. The Messiah as servant does not suffer for his sins. Israel suffers for its own sins. The Messiah suffers for the sins of the people, dies on their behalf, and through his wounds healing comes. The one servant is in need of redemption. The other servant is the redeemer. The one servant is blind and dumb. The other servant comes to open the eyes of the blind and to set the captives free. One is captive in bondage. The other comes to set the captives free. So what we are shouting out is read the context. Everybody read. The context is our best friend. So what Tovia Singer said, don't read the No, it's quite the opposite. We're shouting to the whole world, read the context, because the more you read it, you realize, oh, if Israel's the servant, why is there a need for another servant? Because Israel, as a nation, falls into sin. Even the righteous remnant is unable to save the nation, but there is one among the people, Isaiah 53:6, where God puts the guilt and sin of the people on him, and he suffers on our behalf that we become righteous. So, as always, the fatal flaw in the videos are pretty easy to find. We come back, we're going to continue exposing this latest fraud from Rabbi Singer.
I'm Paul Burnett, a board-certified doctor of holistic health, and I want to take this opportunity to talk to you about the importance of healthy blood flow and how it's enhanced by a miracle molecule known as nitric oxide. You see, blood vessels release nitric oxide, which increases blood flow, known as something called vasodilation. At Trivita, we take blood flow seriously for our members, and we've developed a nitric oxide plus supplement that has been formulated with natural ingredients designed to maximize nitric oxide production in our blood vessels, which increases blood flow. You may be wondering why you don't have as much energy as you used to. One study that I came across revealed that by the age of 40, we only produce about 50% of the nitric oxide production as compared to our 20s, and by the age of 70, the study showed that we're only producing about 15 to 25%. I have good news. As we age, there's another way for our body to increase nitric oxide production, and that's by converting nitrates in vegetables like beetroot into nitric oxide. Bottom line, with more nitric oxide, we stimulate more blood flow to our vital organs, and we experience more energy while supporting healthy blood pressure. Trivita's Nitric Oxide Plus has been formulated to increase nitric oxide production and blood flow at every age.
To place your order for products to support your wellness goals, call 1-800-771-5584 or online at Trivita.com. As a Trivita introductory offer, use promo code BROWN25 and receive a 25% discount on the products of your choice. Call 1-800-771-5584. 800-771-5584. May you live with greater wellness.
I am with research scholar Jonathan McClatchie. Welcome to Thoroughly Jewish Thursday. If you want to check out an amazing website, if you have questions, if you're struggling, maybe you're a follower of Jesus, but you're going through a hard time, maybe you don't know what to believe, but you would like to believe, go to talkaboutdoubts.com. Talkaboutdoubts.com. We'll tell you more about that a little later in the broadcast. All right, so we're just taking time for the sake of those who get led astray, for those who are uneducated, ignorant of certain things, or just find certain arguments powerful and they don't know where to go for resources. So we're taking apart another deeply flawed video of Rabbi Tovia Singer, where he makes the claim of, if you just knew these arguments, you'd leave Christianity in a moment. So he and again, it's sad because people get picked off by this. They're counter-missionaries, I know, fine rabbi scholars. We've interacted for years, and I don't see them coming up with these kind of cheap, worthless arguments. But in any case, they're out there. Tovia's active on the internet, so of course we want to help people find the truth. So he talks about Daniel 7, verses 13 and 14, that rather than being some type of proof of the gospel message, the Christian message, it's actually self-refuting. So let's listen to what he has to say.
I just would add to this, Christians, if they thought about this, they would, let's say for a moment, if Daniel 7:13 is speaking about the Messiah, for those who don't know, Daniel 7 is in Aramaic. If Daniel 7 is about the Messiah, that means Jesus can't be the Messiah. Could there be a greater proof that the core tenet of the Christian religion is flawed than Daniel 7? Because Daniel 7, 13 and 14, if it is speaking about the Messiah, it says there explicitly, 13 and 14, chapter 7, that all nations will serve him, and then his sovereignty will be from one end of the world to the other, as we find in Zechariah chapter 9, verse 10. Not the coming in on a donkey into Jerusalem, that everyone knows goes in the Gospels, but verse 10. So most of the world does not believe in Christianity, most of the world. So it didn't happen. So can there be a greater proof that Jesus is not the Messiah than Daniel 7:13, if we concede at all?
Okay, again, Jonathan, over to you. How do you respond to his argument?
Yeah, so Rabbi Tovia Singer takes the Son of Man in Daniel 7, verse 13 and 14 to be the Messiah, which actually seems to be, I think, a minority view among contemporary Jewish rabbis. Most Jewish rabbis I've interacted with would take the Son of Man figure to be a personification of the nation of Israel. That seems to be the mainstream view these days. But Rabbi Tovia Singer takes the view, and I agree with him, that this text is actually, in fact, about the Messiah. But he argues that nonetheless this refutes Christianity, because we don't see Jesus having established global dominion, etc. It says in Daniel 7, verse 14, to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. And so if the Messiah hasn't established, if Jesus hasn't established global dominion like he's supposed to in Daniel 7:14, and of course other messianic prophetic texts, then he is disqualified, so the argument goes, from being the Jewish Messiah. The problem with the argument, though, is that if it's at least a plausible reading of the Hebrew Scriptures that there are two comings of the Messiah in view, then the fact that Jesus hasn't fulfilled the entire messianic mission can only be taken as relatively weak evidence against his messianic identity when we compare it to the numerous points of specific fulfillment that Jesus has of the messianic prophetic scriptures. So when we read the Hebrew Bible, we see that there are some texts that deal with the Messiah's suffering. We see that, for example, in Isaiah 53 that we just visited. And there are other texts that deal with the Messiah coming in glory, like we see in Daniel 7, as well as other texts. And so this, of course, gave rise to the idea among ancient Jewish thinkers that there were perhaps two messiahs. You've got Messiah ben Joseph and Messiah ben David. And another plausible interpretation is, well, maybe there are just two comings. Maybe in the first coming of the Messiah, he comes to suffer, as per Isaiah 53 and other scriptures, and maybe in the second coming, he comes in glory, riding on the clouds. And if that's at least a plausible reading of the Hebrew scriptures, then it can't really be taken as a decisive piece of evidence against his messianic identity. It would only be relatively weak evidence. And when we have such strong support from numerous messianic texts that he has fulfilled, together with the fact that Jesus proved his messianic identity by returning from the dead, that I think provides us with a strong justification for thinking that he will indeed return to fulfill the rest of the messianic mission. Any further thoughts on that, Dr. Brent?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, amen to everything you just said. First, Rabbi Singer certainly knows that the Talmud itself raises the question in the tractate Sanhedrin, beginning at the end of 96b, as to is the son of David, is he coming in the clouds of heaven, as per Daniel 7, or is he coming meek and lowly riding on a donkey, as per Zechariah 9? And the answer is that if we're worthy, he'll come in the clouds of heaven, and if we're unworthy, he'll come meek and lowly riding on a donkey. The only problem is the Bible doesn't say either or. The Bible says both and. They're both going to happen. So how do we understand it? Well, his first coming and his second coming. And as you said, you have all these prophecies about his first coming, and I can make a very strong case that Scripture indicated that he had to come before the second temple was destroyed, and that we see from other passages that he would die, that he would be rejected, and that he would rise again. So you say, okay, well, who suffered, was rejected by his own people, died, rose again before the destruction of the temple, and who, according to the Scriptures, has become a light to nations around the world? There are more people professing to be followers of Jesus than any other religious faith on the entire world, and through him they've come to know the God of Israel. So who is that person? Well, then, who's the only possible candidate to fulfill the rest? And you have passages like Isaiah 42. He will not falter or be discouraged till he establishes justice on the earth. In his teaching, the islands will put their hope. So this is a process. This is an ongoing process. The last thing that I find so ironic, and as you mentioned, Rabbinic Judaism comes up with the idea of two messiahs, the suffering Messiah, the son of Joseph, and the ruling and reigning Messiah, the son of David, or there's a priestly Messiah and a royal Messiah. So it has two messiahs, whereas the Bible only speaks of one. And we say it's one with two phases of his work, two comings. But the thing that's the most ironic is that we're drawn to this very passage because of Yeshua himself quoting it in the Gospels, most prominently in Mark, the 14th chapter, where he says explicitly that you'll see the Son of Man coming in the clouds, meaning in the future. So he himself is telling us when this is going to happen in the future. So when Rabbi Singer says, don't read this unless you want to forsake your Christian faith, once again, it's the exact opposite. Read it to confirm your faith. We got about a minute and a half for any closing thoughts you have.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. There are different approaches that one can take to understanding the Hebrew Scriptures. You can understand it as there being two messiahs. You can understand it that the way that the manner in which the Messiah will come will depend on the state of the nation of Israel before God. And another plausible interpretation is that there are, in fact, two comings. And given that it's a plausible interpretation, I think this is only relatively weak evidence against Jesus' messianic identity.
Yeah, and you know what I love is that you're a research scholar. You do debates, but you wouldn't be called a polemicist in that regard. You're just kind of dispassionately weighing the evidence. Whereas I've been debating rabbis and interacting for over 50 years, and in my mind, it's more kind of demolition. Like this is the most ridiculous self-refuting argument. Like you said, the earlier ones, don't read the context, and you actually saying read the context because it backfires against their position. But I love the way you so dispassionately say it's at best relatively weak, and I'm saying you completely shoot yourself in the foot with just the difference in our personalities and approaches. But friends, all that to say that you'll find Jonathan to be a faithful guide because he's not coming with an axe to grind or a point to prove. And in fact, we'll talk about that on the other side of the break, because you're a thinking man, you remain a thinking man as I do. And for decades, I've taken in, let's look at the arguments, just as you do. Friends, the website to visit, talkaboutdoubts.com or jonathanmcclatchie.com. We'll be right back. Michael Brown here, friends, with a very, very sober announcement. We're living in different days. We're living in different times. The battle has come to us, and like it or not, every single one of us, we are in the line of fire today. And friends, there is an all-out war today against the Jewish people. There is an all-out war like there was before the Holocaust to annihilate and destroy Jewish people. And God has positioned us with the line of fire on the front lines to do two things that are very, very critical. One, to speak the truth about Israel, to speak the truth about anti-Semitism, to push back against the destructive lies, to push back against false theologies, to stand strong and tall and say, this is what the Word says, and this is what reality is. And then with that, friends, we also reach out to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. It is a key role that we play. We are equipping Jewish evangelists around the world. We are equipping the church to share the good news. We are directly involved in winning Jewish people to Jesus, Yeshua. So we are fighting on these two critically important fronts in unique ways. And I want to call on each of you to stand with me, stand with our support team, become a torchbearer today. These are urgent days, and you can make a difference. Go to askdrbrown.org, askdrbrown.org. Click on Donate Monthly Support. $1 a day or more. You become a torchbearer, a monthly supporter. Together we're making a difference. We will pour into you. You immediately get 2 free books that will bless you. You get access to many free online classes, exclusive video content, all other benefits. Read about it at askdrbrown.org. Join our support team today. Welcome back, friends, to Thoroughly Jewish Thursday. Shalom, shalom to each of you. I'm joined by my colleague, Jonathan McClatchie, now a research scholar biologist with the Discovery Institute. Jonathan, just take a moment to tell us about the Discovery Institute and your work there.
Sure. So Discovery Institute is a nonprofit organization. They fund research into and promote the public understanding of intelligent design, which is the study of patterns in nature which bear the hallmarks of conscious activity. And so the intelligent design argument is that there are certain features of nature, both in the physical and life sciences, that point to an intelligent creator as being responsible for their origins. So, for example, the information content of the cell. In every other realm of experience, when you find information content encoded in digital form, language conventions, and information processing, storage, retrieval apparatus, and irreducible complex machines, and complex arrangements of parts, and so forth, we habitually associate those with conscious activity. And so the existence of such phenomena in the biological realm is not particularly surprising if we suppose that a mind is involved, but becomes wildly surprising on the falsity of that hypothesis, or so I would contend. And so in light of that vastly top-heavy likelihood ratio, it confirms a design perspective. And so that's the essence of the intelligent design argument. And of course, it can be applied to the physical sciences as well. You've probably heard of the fine-tuning of the laws and constants of our universe, as well as the prior environmental fitness of nature, those features of chemistry and so forth that seem to be designed for so as to make nature conducive to life, in particular advanced life, and that I think makes better sense on a theistic perspective than on a naturalistic perspective. So I've been working there full-time since June of this year. I was previously a professor at Sattler College in Boston, as you mentioned, in Massachusetts, and so I do a lot of writing for evolutionnews.org, which is the official blog of the Discovery Institute. You can also find the podcast at idthefuture.com. I'm a regular guest on that as well, talking about evidence of design in the natural world. So, yeah, there's a little bit of background about the Discovery Institute.
Wonderful. And even though you've experienced forgiveness of sins in the Lord, you enjoy fellowship with the Lord, you didn't come to the Lord through a mystical experience, but through analyzing of evidence. Again, could you just give us the brief explanation of how it is that you concluded the truth of the gospel?
Sure. So I actually grew up in a Christian home. So I actually became a Christian quite young, when I was around 7 years old. So I didn't undertake a lot of that kind of intellectual analysis at that age. But when I went to university, I was confronted with various worldview perspectives. I had good friends who were Muslims. I had a close friend who was a Jehovah's Witness. I had a good friend who was a Taoist, and I knew a lot of atheists. And I became very interested in the question of how can we robustly determine the validity or otherwise of religious claims. And so I became very interested in religious epistemology, which is the discipline within philosophy that explores how we know what we believe we know. And so I'm a very staunch evidentialist. I'm a Christian because I am persuaded by the public evidence that Christianity is actually true. So there's essentially 5 major lines of argument that I would adduce for Christianity. One would be the case for the resurrection of Jesus. Another one would be the conversion of Saul of Tarsus. Another would be the argument from messianic prophecy. Another would be the C.S. Lewis trilemma argument, and the final one would be the argument from contemporary miracles. And I believe that those arguments, particularly taken in aggregate, provide a very compelling justification for thinking that Christianity is in fact true.
Right. So it's not a matter of turn your mind off. It's a matter of examine the facts, examine the evidence, and that's what we encourage folks to do. And that's the frustration that we can have as people have studied and dug into these things, when you'll see some sensationalistic video from Rabbi Singer with sensationalistic title and very bombastic claims as if he's like changing the world and all these Christians are finding the truth through him, etc. And it's like, oh, this is so easy to answer. This is so easy to, it's not even, you have to think about it. It's sad that people get duped. So in this sensationalistic video, if you just don't watch this unless you want to lose your Christian faith, he makes a claim about anti-Semitism in the Gospels, that basically there's an evolutionary development that from Mark to the earliest to John to the latest, they become increasingly anti-Jewish. Let's listen to what he has to say.
Jacob hosted a conversation I had with Bart Ehrman, no less, and he agreed with me that the Passion narrative in all 4 Gospels is a fiction, quite clearly, but it is allegorical, and it is, in effect, a political allegory, attempting to blame collectively, astonishingly, collectively the Jews for the death of Jesus, and while simultaneously exonerating the Romans for what was clearly a Roman execution, crucifixion, a distinctly Roman form of execution. The story, all 4 Gospels, what they all share in common are certain similarities: the betrayal of Judas, the conviction by the Sanhedrin, Pilate declaring Jesus to be innocent in all 4 Gospels, and a Jewish crowd chanting for Jesus, violently insisting on Jesus' death. Even in Matthew's Gospel, as if we needed the point, the crowd, I guess in unison, collectively says his blood is on us and on our children. Professor Ehrman agreed with me that that's political fiction designed to blame the Jews and exonerate the Romans for what is pretty clearly a Roman execution.
Right, because as we can mark that, pun intended, so all the 4 Gospels seek to exonerate Rome, Pontius Pilate, and seek to hold the Jews uniquely guilty for Jesus' crucifixion. And as you pointed out, Matthew 27:25, the Jews say, crucify him, we take it upon ourselves and our children. And it's only in Matthew's Passion narrative that we're introduced to Mrs. Pontius Pilate, who also thinks that Jesus is completely innocent. But you could see the plot devices you pointed out, James, because of the 4 Gospels, Mark, the earliest, is least anti-Semitic. All of them, it's a nightmare. All 4, the Jews just do terribly. If you, the viewer, like Jews and want to remain a Philo-Semite, do not read the Gospels. Don't read the Passion narratives. We don't do well. But Mark is the least bad, and John is the worst of all.
All right, so Jonathan, over to you. as someone who's studied the Gospels quite intensively for years now, what's your response?
Yeah, so the individual that he is interacting with in this clip brings up Bar Ehrman, who raises this particular point. He raises it in his book, Jesus Interrupted, that there is this increasing anti-Semitism. Mark is the earliest gospel written. That's a consensus scholarly view, which I agree with. And that Matthew and Luke came later, and then John is the latest of the gospels to be composed. And the argument is that in the earliest gospel, Mark, it is the least anti-Semitic, whereas John, which is the latest gospel, is the most pro-Roman and the most anti-Jewish. And so you have this evolutionary development, this trajectory, if you will, towards increasing anti-Semitism. And when you actually inspect the accounts, this argument just collapses. Let's go through the relevant texts.
Yeah.
So let's start with Mark. So Mark, as I mentioned, is the earliest gospel written. But as we'll find, Mark actually doesn't fit this pattern at all. Mark, like all the other gospels, describes the plot of the Jewish leaders and the chief priests to kill Jesus. Mark also, like all of the synoptics, records the plot of the chief priests and the bribe given to Judas to betray Jesus. Mark, like the other Gospels, tells us that those who arrested Jesus in Gethsemane were sent from the chief priests. Mark also tells us that Jesus was tried by night before the high priest. Mark tells us that the Jewish leaders delivered him to Pilate in Mark 15:9 and Mark 15:14. Pilate tries to get the Jewish crowd to allow him to release Jesus. But how does that fact square with Bar Ehrman's claim, and apparently Tovia Singer's claim, that in Mark, Bar Ehrman says it's basically Pilate and the Jewish leaders pretty much agreeing that this needs to be done. Now, what about Matthew? Well, the statement, his blood be on us and our children, which comes from the Jewish crowd, is a very striking statement. But Matthew comes before Luke and John, and they don't have that statement, right? So the contrast counts when Ehrman wants to show development from Mark to Matthew, but then it's conveniently forgotten when he moves on to Luke and John. What about Luke then? Well, Luke doesn't have the dramatic hand-washing scene found in Matthew, where Pilate washes his hands of this man. Luke 23:27 has a great crowd of Jewish people weeping and mourning as Jesus is led out to be crucified. Right? How is this more anti-Jewish than Matthew's account? Well, what about John? Well, besides lacking the dramatic scene in Matthew, John also lacks the odd Roman centurion. But isn't John, as the last author writing, supposed to be the most pro-Roman, right? So John doesn't include the Roman centurion that says, surely this was a righteous man. In Mark, the Jewish leaders mock Jesus on the cross, but this mockery is not recorded in John. Well, why not? If John's gospel is further along the trajectory of anti-Jewish sentiment, so there's all kinds of problems with this approach to examining the gospels. I would maintain that, in fact, all evolutionary developmental theories concerning the Gospels are essentially bunk, and this is just one example of those. When you actually read the text for yourself, the argument does not survive an initial cursory inspection of the relevant passages.
There's a story, Jonathan, of it could be apocryphal story of the famed German professor Hegel, and he went and presented he had just given a lecture about his theory of historical development and things like that, and one of his students said, Herr Hegel, the historical evidence is against your position. And according to the story, which again, this may be apocryphal, Professor Hegel replied, so much for history. In other words, I have a theory of history, and if the historical facts don't fit it, so much for history. And it's also interesting, although for sure you have conflicts in John between the Jews, which normally means the Jewish leaders in particular, contextually. For example, John 9, the Jewish parents of the blind man, the Jewish blind man, are distinguished from the Jews, meaning the Jewish leaders. But it's interesting that John 4:22, that's in John, the most overt statement in the gospel, salvation is from the Jews. That's in John's gospel, allegedly the most anti-Semitic of all of them. All right, friends, we want to get into this a little bit further, and then talk about dealing with doubts, dealing with questions. The website to go to is talkaboutdoubts.com, and it's not just a place for, I have a question. There are lots of websites for questions, but this is really for you if you're really you're really trying to figure this out. Maybe you're a Muslim and you've read the New Testament and you're really trying to work this out, or you're a Christian and you've been presented with arguments you never heard before and you're struggling in your faith. This is a place where you can actually connect directly with other scholars, other professors, other apologists who kind of take you by the hand and say, let's get you through this. And they've seen great fruit, not by looking away from the evidence, but by looking at the evidence.
Let's hear what Trivita customers are saying.
Dr. Brown, I can't wait to tell you that those supplements are absolutely amazing. My strength has gone up at least 15 pounds in everything I do. I mean, I can curl, like I'll usually do curls with arms. You know, I'll do 40 to 45. I was doing 60-pound curls 10 times in each arm. And then yesterday, I did a back workout, and I was doing weight that I haven't done since my 20s. And I usually ride my bike to the gym. It's about a 10, 12-minute bike ride. And then on the way back, after I've done my weight training, you know, I ride back, but I'm huffing and puffing. And I rode my bike there and back, and I had so much energy. I'm telling you, the combination of the nitric oxide with the MyoHealth is just amazing. I can't believe how much strength I have right now. I mean, I'm just really excited about it.
Trivita wants you to experience wellness too. Do something good for your heart and cardiovascular system. Learn how to get 25% off Nitric Oxide Plus. Call 800-811-9628 or go to Trivita.com. Use promo code BROWN25 in the shopping cart to receive 25% off your first order, and Trivita will give a substantial portion of your order to help support the Line of Fire radio broadcast. Call 800-811-9628 or go to Trivita.com. Use promo code BROWN25 in the shopping cart. Get 25% off Nitric Oxide Plus. Call 800-811-9628. 800-811-9628.
Welcome back, friends, to Thoroughly Jewish Thursday, joined by my friend and colleague, Jonathan McClatchie, now full-time research scholar in biology at the Discovery Institute. We'll put links up, different websites where mentioned, different articles, resources. We'll put some of my relevant videos up, all in the description on our YouTube page as well. So, Jonathan, anything else you want to say about this claim that the Gospels become increasingly anti-Semitic and pro-Roman, starting with Mark and ending with John?
No, I think that we have more or less covered that territory. I think that the argument falls flat as soon as one does a cursory inspection. It's an example of cherry picking the Gospels. And what you find is that when you inspect evolutionary developmental theories concerning the Gospels, where you have as the supposed development from the earliest Gospel to the latest, all of these, I think, fall apart as soon as you actually read the texts. Happy to go through a different one if you would like.
Give me another example of why this evolutionary development. So you start with Mark, and then Matthew borrowed from Mark, and then Luke from Matthew, or whichever the order, and then John the last, and they're going to go in one direction as opposed to being four independent compositions with some overlap and some borrowing, but otherwise independent compositions with inspired messages. Give us another example of the flaw with the evolutionary development idea.
Sure. So here is what Bart Ehrman has to say concerning another developmental claim pertaining to Jesus' attitude towards his death. And this is from Jesus Interrupted, page 65 and 66. He says, concerning Mark, he says, Jesus is silent the entire time, as if in shock, until his cry at the end, echoing Psalm 22. Mark is trying to say something by this portrayal. He doesn't want his readers to take solace in the fact that God was really there providing Jesus with physical comfort. He dies in agony, unsure of the reason he must die. He then writes concerning the Gospel of Luke, I quote, "In this account, Jesus is not at all confused about what is happening to him or why. He is completely calm and in control of the situation. He knows what is about to occur, and he knows what will happen afterward. This is a far cry from the Jesus of Mark who felt forsaken to the end." Well, is that what Mark is doing? Well, let's go and read Mark. So Mark 8, verse 31, for example, it says that he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. Now, does it sound to you that he has no idea why he's supposed to die, and is completely confused about the fact that God is letting this happen to him? Mark 9:31 is another example for. He was teaching his disciples, saying to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he is killed, after 3 days, he will rise. What about Mark 10:32 and following, where it says, and taking the 12 again, he began to tell them what was to happen to him. Or Mark 12, verses 6 through 11, where you have the parable of the tenants who killed the son of the vineyard owner, offending the Jewish rulers who knew, according to verse 12, that he had told the parable against them. And so we see that it doesn't appear that as we read Mark that Jesus, as portrayed in Mark, is completely confused about the reason he must die and completely lacks understanding of why this has to happen to him. In fact, there are more problems with this idea. So in Mark, as in all of the synoptics, Jesus answers the high priest question, are you the Messiah, in bold, unequivocal terms. This is in Mark 14:61, where Jesus said, I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. But this claim is missing from John, which is the last gospel. Another problem. So of all the gospels, only John, the last of them, records the most human admission of physical pain and weakness in the words from the cross. I thirst in John 19:28. So again, the argument, as soon as you begin to inspect the text, it just falls apart. It disintegrates. It's just not a very good argument.
And what about confirmations of the Gospels that we might find, say in the book of Acts, something that I haven't focused on over the years as an area of apologetics, but I know you have. Can you give me any thoughts about that?
Sure. I'll just give two examples quickly, one from the Gospels and one from Acts. So in Mark 6, for example, we have the account concerning the imprisonment and execution of John the Baptist. And in verse 18, it says, for John, and it gives us the reason why Herod imprisons John. For John had been saying to Herod, that is Herod Antipas, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to put him to death, but she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he kept him safe. And so, according to Mark, the reason, and also Matthew and Luke, the reason why Herod Antipas has John imprisoned is because of John's persistent complaints against Herod Antipas's adulterous affair with Herodias, his brother Philip's ex-wife. Now, if you read Flavius Josephus, who, as you know, was a first-century Jewish historian, he mentions that he gives a slightly different take on the motivation for having John the Baptist in prison. Not necessarily mutually exclusive, but it is different. That is, that John the Baptist's imprisonment was due to Herod's suspicious temper and his fear of an uprising. John was getting too popular. People seemed ready to do anything he should advise and so forth. And so that's why John gets locked up. Now, what's interesting, though, to note is that Josephus tells us that in consequence of Herod's adulterous affair with Herodias, Herod also had to divorce his own previous wife to marry her. His own previous wife went back home to her father, Aretas IV, king of the Nabateans, and this actually caused a war between Herod Antipas and his former father-in-law, which Herod lost. His armies got destroyed, according to Josephus. And according to Josephus, there was a rumor circulating among the Jewish people that Herod's defeat at the hands of Aretas was God's judgment for what he had done against John the Baptist. Well, that makes sense in light of the Gospels, where we learn that the reason why Herod has John in prison is because of John's persistent complaints against Herod's adulterous affair, which we learn from Josephus was the very adulterous affair that caused the war that Herod lost in the first place. So the accounts fit together in just the way you would expect on the hypothesis of straightforward historical reportage. You might wonder, okay, the slight variation in perspective as to why Herod has John imprisoned, they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but you might wonder, how come the evangelists appear to have this insider knowledge, this inside scoop as to what Herod's motivations are for having John imprisoned? If we look at Luke's gospel in chapter 8, we learn in the first 3 verses of various female disciples that followed Jesus out of Galilee, one of whom mentioned in verse 3 is actually Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's household manager. And so Jesus actually has a female disciple in the highest ranks of Herod's employment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And again, it's not one of those things that the Gospels are shouting out, look at this, look at this. It's, as you know, we'd say, it's an unintended confirmation. It's like, oh, now dig a little, and there's the information just sitting there, and it wouldn't be such a big mystery. All right, we just got a few more minutes, but we never want to downplay or demean a struggle someone has, because if it's real to them, it's real. Someone may raise an argument to me that I think is complete nonsense, but it's very real to that person. Or I may struggle with something that you might think, that's so silly. But if it's real, we recognize that. Why did you talk about doubts? Did you feel that people often suppress their doubts or don't have a place to go with their questions?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I've talked to many hundreds of people who are either ex-Christians or are considering becoming ex-Christians and struggle with doubts about faith. I've also watched hundreds, if not thousands, of YouTube videos of deconversion stories. I find those fascinating to watch. I've also read books by deconverts. I follow blogs of deconverts. So I'm really interested in the reasons why people leave the Christian faith. And over time, I've come to recognize more and more that the vast majority of people that walk away from the faith don't even know what the positive case for Christianity is. As I've studied the Gospels and Acts and the case for the resurrection and other lines of argument for Christianity, I found it to be quite overwhelming. And so, most listeners weren't familiar, for example, with the example of an external confirmation I just gave in the Gospels. And that's just one of numerous examples I could give for the Gospels, and then there are a lot of examples that one could deduce for Acts as well. And those arguments, I think, cumulatively provide a strong foundation for thinking that the Gospels and Acts are rooted in the testimony of individuals who are close up to the facts, well-informed, in the habit of being scrupulous, and therefore we have confidence that the set of claims in the Gospels and Acts concerning the nature and variety of the resurrection encounters with the risen Jesus actually reflect what the purported witnesses of the resurrection actually claimed. And then we can run a trilemma on the apostles. Is it that Jesus rose from the dead? Are they honestly mistaken? Or are they lying? And I would argue that the best explanation is that, in fact, Jesus rose from the dead. And so I tried to give people the opportunity to at least hear out the best and most robust case for Christianity before they make their decision to walk away. And of course, we also mentor and talk to ex-Christians who want to explore whether there's a rational path back to faith as well. And
real quick, we've only got 2 minutes, but are you continuing to hear good reports? Last time we talked, you had some real heartwarming accounts where people have come with questions and now left with a real solid confidence.
Oh, absolutely. You can find some video testimonials on our YouTube channel, Talk About Doubts YouTube channel. There's also some written testimonial excerpts from encouraging emails I've received, which you can find on the talkaboutdoubts.com website. And we have numerous people now who are much more confident in their faith. They are even mentoring other people. We have several people who are past inquirers who are now part of our team who are sharing their experiences and encouragements with others who are just starting out on their journey. So we have many encouraging testimonials from people that have reached out to us concerning their doubts.
Thank God. Thank you for all the work you do and the other scholars do. You know, Jonathan, some of the comments that we get that I find most gratifying, they're sad first, but they're happy ending, are those who lost their faith because of Tovia Singer videos, came across ours, and now they're stronger in the faith than they've ever been. They've now seen the flaws in his arguments and the truth of God's word and the truth of the Messiah. And friends, for those who don't know, we have our whole Jewish website, realmessiah.com, realmessiah.com, where you can listen to the debate I did with Tovia Singer over 30 years ago. You would have been able to watch it on video too, but he vetoed that. Yep, that's the truth. And other debates with rabbis, hundreds of answers to key questions in video form and written form at realmessiah.com. So what we'll do in the description on the YouTube page, after we put everything together in this interview here, we'll post it. You'll see it with links to talkaboutdoubts.com and the other websites, Discovery Institute, Jonathan McClatchie's website, Isaiah 53 paper. We'll post that, some of my relevant videos and resources, so that hopefully if you're seeking the truth, you'll find all the answers you need. Hey, Jonathan, keep up the great work, and it's wonderful to know that the truth sets us free.
Thank you.
All right, friends, that is it for today. Back with you tomorrow on The Line of Fire.